If we weren't aware before all of the recent pool closures, we are now. Trying to replicate swimming at home becomes rather hard. Yes, there's plenty of exercises and resistance work you can do that can target some of the similar muscles, but trying to combine the cardiovascular element becomes rather tricky. So let me introduce the sport of rowing. It basically works a lot of the same systems and muscles as swimming, but how close is this crossover, and is it a useful sport for us as triathletes? Well, to find out, I'm going to be speaking to an athlete who has a lot of experience in both the sports of swimming and rowing. I personally have a lot of experience in swimming, but it's rather limited when it comes to running. So I've drafted in an athlete who is now a triathlete, but started her sporting career as a swimmer, then moved into rowing before finding the correct sport. I'm talking about Steph Clutterbuck, who you might recognise from our Team Mixed Tri Relay a few months ago. Well, hi Steph, thank you for coming along and sharing your expertise. Now, I am curious as to, you obviously went from swimming into rowing.
Yeah.
What attributes did you take from swimming into the sport of rowing?
I think the training principles that you learn as a swimmer are so kind of comparable to rowing. You talk a lot about swimming at staring at the black line, and for years you're training staring at the black line, and then you come to the gym, you get on a rowing machine and you're staring at the grey screen in front of you. So the ability to switch off and find joy in the long monotonous sessions that require a huge amount of mental resilience as well as physical is probably one of the predominant things that I took from swimming into rowing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you get numbers, I guess, which is something more than you get in swimming, isn't it? And what about your body, like physically? What did you have to really work on strength-wise, and what strength did you carry over from swimming into rowing? Yeah,
so I think I found that I adapted to rowing quite quickly because I had an engine that came from years of swimming. The lungs were there, but the strength probably wasn't. So I had to do a lot of strength-based work, especially through my shoulders, to make sure that my ribs were protected. And then eventually we'd realised that I'd picked up a back injury because I looked strong through my torso, but wasn't quite. So the way that you use your spine in rowing and swimming is slightly different. Yeah. And I was trying to row with a swimmer's spine, which was what caused the problems. Okay. So I did a huge amount of core stability work to keep myself set and robust through the drive phase at the beginning of the rowing stroke, which is where kind of the most amount of pressure comes through.
And did your physique change much? Because obviously rowing, you are working your leg muscles more than in swimming, but did your body shape change?
Yeah, it did. I think a lot of that comes with the age at which I was kind of picking them up as well. So I swam all through my childhood and left when I was 19, and I didn't really do any strength work. Okay. I think at the time that I was swimming, it wasn't a huge part of the training programs, especially as a growing child, essentially. Yeah. And then when I started rowing, strength was a huge focus of the program. So I was notorious for ripping jeans. I think I was outgrowing my clothes so quickly. And I actually had bigger shoulders as a rower than I did as a swimmer. Okay. In my first year of rowing, I did a bit of swimming, and I was actually setting sprint PBs over 50 metres. No that was way. Like, I didn't need the swimming training, but I had the strength from rowing. So that was always a bit of a funny one. I'd message old coaches like, haha, just another PB.
Well, that's fascinating. I mean, it leads me on really nicely. Like, do you still use rowing at all for your swimming aspect of triathlon? Or even if you didn't, if you did, how would that kind of like, how do you feel it would help back that way?
Yeah, so I don't, and that comes back to the injury that I had. Yeah. The pain that I experienced in my back continued for about 6 years, and I've only been pain-free for about a year and a half. Oh my God. So for me, it's not worth going back, but I have friends that very successfully use cross-training, and I think once you are able to relax into rowing, it's such a phenomenal cardio workout that if it's raining outside or it's the middle of winter and you've had enough of sitting on the turbo, the erg becomes a really good cross-training tool.
Yeah. So would you, if you did use it, would you think you'd use it more to benefit your cycling than your swimming?
Probably. It is interesting. I don't know. I think the stability you get through your shoulders from rowing would be very beneficial to swimming. But what I've found it difficult to replicate the feel that you need in the water. I think you'd probably get it more from rowing on the water rather than rowing on the ergo if you look at fluid dynamics.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Final question on the sort of the comparison. Like, which sport in your mind is harder, both mentally and physically, and which can you get your heart rate up the highest?
Okay, my heart rate definitely goes up more on the rowing machine, without a doubt. I think it's at my max, just sat on it right now. But it's funny, I think I was a swimmer for 11 years and I never quite cracked butterfly. I couldn't figure it out. I think there was just a combination.
Your version of AT butterfly compared to ours is very, very different. But
I think there is, when you're dealing with water, there's so much technique that's involved, and you're able to adapt quite quickly. I found on the water for rowing, but butterfly swimming, that was something I never quite got my head around.
So that was your hardest?
That was my hardest.
Okay. Interesting. Cool, well, we'll come on to tips in a moment, but yeah, really interesting, thank you. Well, Steph has mentioned the muscles, but let's take a closer look at how they actually compare. Starting with the one we know most about, swimming. What muscles do we actually use when we're swimming front crawl? Well, we know that swimming is upper body dominant, so we've got the deltoids, which are the tops of your shoulders, the well-known latissimus dorsi, aka your lats, down the side of your back, then the trapezius, which is the top of your back and into your neck, and the large arm muscles, so your biceps and your triceps. And these muscles work together in the swim to stabilize your shoulder blade as your arm catches the water and pulls your body forwards over it. In order for your shoulder and arm muscles to work effectively, you also need to have a strong core to engage. Well, this includes your abdominals and the aforementioned traps and lats, all of which will work together to perfect that streamlined position and help with that rotation and balance that's essential for optimizing your arm pull. As much as swimming is upper body dominant, it's still going to involve your legs. So you're going to have your hip flexors, quads, hamstrings and glutes all working in the kick and the stabilizing factor of your stroke, and even your calves. And remember, you've got the push off the wall, which is another aspect which brings your legs in. And let's look at the contrast of rowing. As much as rowers are known for having quite big shoulders and you are actually moving the oar with your arms and your hand, effectively it's the leg muscles that are doing more of the work. So let's take a breakdown and see which muscles are doing what. Upper body wise, the muscle groups are very similar. So you've got the deltoids working the shoulder reach, the triceps and the biceps on the pull phase of the stroke, and then the big one that really crosses over are the lats. And just as with swimming, the core in rowing is essential to keeping your body taut and being able to actually utilize your levers, aka your arms and your legs, effectively. Rowing targets your posterior chain. So as you take each stroke, your back will be moving away from your legs, actually opening up the hip angle and activating a lot of your back muscles and your transverse abdominals. And as we mentioned, the legs are the powerhouse for rowing. Predominantly your quads, your glutes, your hamstrings, and your calves will be doing their bit as well. Now I want to take a quick look at the breakdown of the two actions, and the fact that both in rowing and swimming you refer to the stroke would imply there's some strong crossovers between the sports. For example, rowing, you've got the catch, the drive, and then the finish. And when there's in swimming, you probably know you've got the catch, the pull, the push, and the recovery. So that's the breakdown. But I want to take a closer look at the actual techniques. And I think it's time to go and speak to Steph again and get some pointers from the expert. All right, Steph, well, as I've got you here, I want to just get some tips on exactly kind of the right basic setup, because I know a little bit and I do see people in the gym sometimes thinking, oh my goodness, what are they doing? But you know more, so I want to go through the very basics of just like, how do I even start out? What do I need to look for?
So making sure that your feet are set up correctly. On most ergs, you can drop the feet down and pick them back up again, but you want the strap to kind of sit over the widest part of the ball of your feet. And usually we start people off by saying the movement pattern is legs, body, arms, and then on the recovery it's arms, body, legs. It becomes more complicated than that, but we know that we like simplicity. So if you pick up the handle, you're going to be starting at the front, and then you push back with your legs, then you come back with your body and pull through with your arms. And then arms forward, rock forward with your body, and then
my knees
bend.
went to get this thing, the hamstrings were getting in the way. Okay, and then you just sort of start to put that together quicker.
Yeah, there you go.
And with that, any kind of cues for how my head and my upper body should be?
So you really want to keep your shoulders relaxed, and the best way to do that is to squeeze that back down by your shoulder blades. So you want a nice long neck and a relaxed head, which sounds a bit weird when you're saying, you know, squeeze your shoulders together, but stay relaxed. You really want to make sure that you're keeping tension from the front all the way through to the back, and the best way to do that is to stay relaxed through your head and your neck.
Okay. What about the grip? Anything on that?
Loose hands, which again, it feels like a juxtaposition
Yeah.
when you're saying, push really hard, but you want to have a wide grip and a relaxed grip. And quite often, if you're watching the guys from British Rowing over on the Instagram account, they will be basically releasing their hands at the back. So they're coming right through and the hands are the kind of little fingers are flopping around. And it's just because this bit is less important. So rowing is not about how hard you pull with your arms.
It's funny, when I was younger, I used to think like, oh, you've always so strong with your arms. Then you meet rowers and you realise you've got really strong legs. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. What about, because obviously you've had a back injury. What about how do you protect your back when rowing? Anything?
It's probably focusing on the glutes actually. So making sure that when you're coming forwards, your glutes are engaged, ready to push back, and that you're staying strong to your spine. So you're not bending forwards, you're not leaning too far back. You're staying as neutral as you can, keeping your core squeezed on, but not tense, so that you can breathe. Engaged, absolutely.
Okay.
And I always like to think about pushing through my big toes. So it just helps to lengthen out the stroke a little bit longer and making sure that you're using kind of all of your lower body to really keep the drive going as long as possible.
Okay, and I think final question, like how far forwards do you come at the end? Like I'm quite tight, so I'm struggling to get far forwards, but like in relation to your feet and the kind of hip and knee bend?
It very much depends on your flexibility.
Okay.
So I was not the gold standard, but I have quite poor ankle flexibility because I fell over a lot as a child and sprained them all of the time, and I just haven't been able to get it back. So my heels wouldn't go down that fast.
Okay.
However, the sooner you can get your heels down, the sooner that you can engage your glutes. So if you're really flexible, you'll be able to get forwards kind of to vertical shins without lifting your heels up.
Yeah.
But if you're less flexible like me, your heels will come up quite early.
And like lots of triathletes and cyclists. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you just have to focusing on making sure your glutes are engaged.
The main reason for choosing rowing over swimming is usually due to convenience. I mean, swimming pools tend to be in far shorter supply than a gym with a rowing machine in it. And some of you might have even invested in your own, as they were in high demand during lockdown. Well, there's different types of rowing machines, but you don't need to get too bogged down with it. It's basically the way that the resistance is provided. So you've got hydraulic, flywheel, magnetic, and water resistance. And unless you're looking at buying one yourself, I wouldn't worry about it, but it's just going to change the feel slightly between different machines. And on the machines where you can set the resistance, don't feel that you need to whack it up to the highest level possible to get any benefit. You're actually better off starting with it at a really nice light resistance and concentrating on getting that perfect form. And once you've developed that, you can start to up the resistance accordingly. Before Steph headed off, I asked her to share a few example sessions that could work for swimmers or triathletes using rowing to help with their training. Now, as with swimming, make sure you include a thorough warm-up, checking your position, technique, and that your heart rate is up and your muscles are warm. So session number 1 is 12 times 500 meters hard. So at your VO2 max pace. And these are on 5 minutes, which means you start each set after 5 minutes, which will give you a total time of 60 minutes of rowing, and take a rest or light rowing in between those 500 meter efforts. Session 2 is a pyramid session. So you want to keep the same pace throughout this and the same resistance, but you're going to change the stroke rate. So it's going to build from upper aerobic into sweet spot and back down again. So the first 8 minutes are at a stroke rate of 22. Then you go down to just 6 minutes, but the stroke rate goes up to 24. Then down to 4 minutes, stroke rate up to 26. Down to 2 minutes, stroke rate up to 28, and then you work your way back up again. So 4 minutes with a rate of 26, 6 minutes, a rate of 24, 8 minutes, back to a rate of 22. And you're going to take 2 minutes rest after each of those blocks. Session number 3, in Steph's words, this is a classic rowing test. So you're going to push hard for 30 minutes at a low rate, aiming to keep it as low as 20 if you can. She does say though, this can be pretty taxing on your back, so make sure you build it up by breaking it down into chunks if you've not done something like this before. And then our final session, session number 4, is a pure endurance set. It's 4 times 2 kilometers at a nice low rate of 19, taking just 1 minute rest between each to reset. Now, Steph says if you want to build it, you can add additional blocks of 2 kilometers, or you can increase that 2K to a 3K. But again, definitely make sure you build it up over time. Well, there are many pro triathletes and swimmers who've used rowing to complement their swim training, whether that's in pre-season when they're trying to get strong, or maybe during the season to mix training up and just help with that little bit of an overload. You can also use it if you can't swim for some reason, whether that's pools closed, like we've touched on, or maybe you've got an injury that's really specific to swimming. Now, that said, I haven't been able to find any well-known high-level rowers who've used swimming in their cross training because, well, it doesn't correlate so well that way. So I think we're quite lucky that we have that aspect. And also, rowing does seriously complement cycling. So as triathletes, in a wonderful position to be able to take advantage of rowing as it crosses over to both of our sports. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed it. It's inspired you to give this new sport a go. Give us a like if you have. And remember, you can hit that globe so you don't miss any more of our videos.